Okay, our next topic is related to something that is very much, almost always a part of the end user requirements, and that is managing files, right? What goes up, as we know, right? Okay. Now, there's two main aspects, of course, to this situation. Getting them where you want them, like file upload, and then, of course, downloading them back down is part of that same aspect. The other is, where are you going to put them? Right? Where are you going to store these files when you do actually upload them? Okay? And that actually bears some discussion. We have some choices. In the earlier days, most novice programmers, building a web application where you're uploading files, just would store them in the file system on the web server, like some sort of /uploads folder or something like that. Okay? Can you do that still? Obviously you can, right? Is it a good idea? Well, there's some pros and cons you should be aware of, and we'll talk more about that, right? You might not have ever thought of this, but another thought is you can actually store the files in a database. And of course, the most high-end version of an approach to this is to actually have a separate, actual proper document server, right? Okay, well, we're going to talk a bit more about each of these options. How about the file system? Pros, yeah, very easy to do, easy to code. As I said, even very novice programmers can easily get this up and working, right? Advantages as well. Hey, if you have FTP access or something to the web server, you can just see all the files right in their folders, manage them directly, whatever you need to do, backups and so on and so forth. And that's no doubt is extremely fast from a performance point of view, right? But there are some definite cons you do need to be aware of, okay? The absolute loose coupling, no coupling, okay, between the actual files and any records in the database and so on as well. So there's no strong relationship to records, to what you have in the database. You have to make sure you manually delete a file along with the record. So if you have a record for a client and you want to actually go and delete all the files related to that client because you're deleting the client record, well, you have to make sure that happens, right? And believe me, it tends to not always happen reliably, okay? And there's sometimes issues with file access permissions, okay? One of the ways to get around that is, actually give write access to that folder on the server, right? It's a major security issue once you start opening up holes like that, right? So generally speaking, I don't encourage this approach at all, okay? Very, very much a novice approach. All right. Storing them in a database, you might not have thought of it, as I said. The big advantage is your built-in referential integrity. All the joins and everything else that you have in the database also applies to these because they're just stored as an object in the database itself, okay? All the data is in a single location, okay? Whenever you back up your database, you're backing up these files as well because they're stored internally in the database itself. So there's no special permissions are required whatsoever. It's just another object that you're storing, right? Now there are some cons, okay? You only access the files through a database connection, right? To preview the file, okay, you actually have to get it out of the database and materialize it as the type of object that it is first, okay? But if much of the time you're just uploading the files and you download them again, it's not a big deal, right? But you must execute a little bit of code even just to do a download. It's not just a simple link to the file up like any other file on the web. Okay, so security is a big, big concern here. So the web server by definition has to be visible to the internet. So it is sitting in front of the actual firewall itself, right? Behind the firewall with that extra safety then, well, you'll have your database server. Optionally, in a more upscale or professional application, you probably do have some sort of a document server or Windows Communication Foundation app or something that is functioning as one, right? Now that's not visible to the internet. It's behind the firewall and much more secure. Either of those two approaches enhance the security of the arrangement tremendously, right? Okay. Now, kind of reflecting back, some students have had familiarity with an earlier technology we used to teach here at the college. We don't even bother anymore. That's web forms, okay? But you still see a lot of sites out there. You see the URL ends in ASPX, so that's a web form application. Well, if you're doing that, there was this built-in file upload control. But you know what? Don't despair. With MVC, it's really not much work at all to get this up and going right, just in our code. So we're going to focus on storing the files in a database, okay? It's a little bit more complicated than just storing them on the web server, but far, far more secure, right? So what does it do? Well, we need a form, okay? We want to post. We add this enclosure type, multi-part form data, and that allows us to actually upload the content of a file itself. And it's as simple as this. We have input type equals file, right? Now we can have a name for the name value pair. The value essentially is the actual content of the file that we upload, okay? So by giving a name to the input type, that allows us to identify the data that gets uploaded to our controller itself, okay? So on the server side, we have to add code to our controller to work with what's uploaded. So .NET Core gives us this nice type here, an iForm file, right? This interface basically defines a file that will be uploaded, okay? So, you know, to keep it simple in my code examples, I'll usually just look at uploading a single file at a time. All we have to do is say multiple equals multiple in the input control itself, in the HTML, if you want to be able to allow the user to select multiple files at once. Really, the only difference is in the controller, you'll have a collection of iForm file objects instead of a single one, right? Okay, so in our create or edit or whatever the post action, okay, up in the actual controller itself, we just add that iForm file, make it nullable, of course, because we might not be uploading one. Call it whatever you want. Now, I said call it whatever you want. Make sure you call it the same name that you gave the input control in the HTML of the view itself, right? So the name of the parameter should match the name of your input element, okay? And as I note there, if you do allow multiple file selection, right, then just have a list of iForm file here instead of a single iForm file. Okay. All right. So we're going to have a table to store it in, right? Now, we're doing code first. That's our focus this term. That's been doing all term long so far, right? Code first development. So what we need to do is, in some class somewhere, add a few properties for storing the actual file in the same database where the object itself, the model class itself, is going to be saved. What do we need? Well, we need a byte array. That byte array will actually store the content, the actual file content itself. Along with that, we'll store as a string the MIME type. MIME types, that goes back in history a number of years now. Basically, it's a descriptor for the type of file, right? And there's standard MIME types for every type of file out there on any computer, right? Now, it's optional, but it's usually a good idea to store the original file name. Now, of course, you can change the name as well after it's uploaded if you want to, right? But when you select a file to upload, whatever the file name is by default available then as a property of the iForm file itself. So normally we would just save it. And that, at a minimum, are the properties you need to add, right? Now, how you add it or what you add it to, well, that bears some further discussion. Okay. Oh, just a note there that byte array, if you're using actual SQL Server for your database, it will map to a var binary max. Okay, that'll be the data type of the field in SQL Server. In SQLite, it's our good old BLOB, our binary large object, basically the same one that we used for our row version information earlier, right? Okay, just a comparison between the two databases. All right. Now, what does the code look like to actually take what's uploaded, this iForm file, and actually get it into the model object so it's saved, okay, in the database itself, okay? Well, this is written assuming that our file being uploaded actually is a picture, okay? And we want to save this picture file in our database. Well, we check if it is null, right? So my iForm file in this code example is named the picture. So if it's not equal to null, then I'll go into the iForm file, check the content type. Well, that gives me my MIME type, okay? Checking the length gives me the file length. And, you know, there's a few different ways you could write this, but basically, if you actually have a MIME type and the file length is not 0, okay, then it looks like you have a file, right? Now, there's a further if here because I'm assuming that what if you selected a Word document or a Notepad file, right? Well, that's not a picture, right? We only want to save it if it's an actual image file, right? So the MIME type will contain image. Now, there are dozens of MIME types for different types of images, your PNGs versus your JPEGs and everything else. But they will all contain in the MIME type the word image somewhere, right? So that's why it's pretty safe to go, if the MIME type contains image, then yep, I know I actually have a picture, right? Now, how do we actually get the content? Now this is true whether it's an image or not. We use a memory stream, okay? And we go to the iForm file, copy it to our memory stream asynchronously, right? And then that memory stream, we can just do a simple to array. And that gives us our byte array to store the image content. Then we just grab the MIME type and the file name, and away we go. And we're assuming here that we've added those properties, for example, to a patient. Maybe we were uploading a profile picture or something like that for the patient. And that is all it would take to actually get it into that patient model object. And when it's saved along with it, right? Okay. So it's that easy, okay? And we can filter by MIME type, so we can only allow certain types of files to be uploaded. Maybe you only want Excel spreadsheets. You can be very general for the different types of MIMEs that are supported by Excel, or very specific. It's up to you, right? Okay, now, here's the question though. Can you see a problem storing the content in the same object as the rest of the properties? So again, think about that. So we have a patient. We've got first name, middle name, last name, and so on and so forth. So if we just add those properties we talked about right into the patient model, okay, then once you've uploaded that, maybe it's a profile picture of the patient, well, every query, okay, that we run, select patient, right, or patients, well, by default, you're going to have all of that data, all that huge amount of that binary content stored in a byte array included in every patient. Now you have a massive amount of data you're pulling out of the database. Maybe all you wanted was an alphabetical list of the names of the patients, right? So that's why we might consider using a one-to-one relationship. Basically, one-to-ones, we haven't done much work with them yet, but they're often used for this purpose. We want to basically offload, you might say, some often large and bulky properties that we don't always need, right? So if I want to get a patient, but I don't need the profile picture right now, why do I have to take it? Let's offload it into a separate entity in a one-to-one relationship. So we're going to talk more about that in our next discussion. But I wanted to give you a hint as to why it could be important.